Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Beyond the Gatekeepers. I am Bishop-Elect Vanessa M, and I am your moderator and host for this evening. I am very happy to be here on tonight, and we have a wonderful person that is here with us. And I am excited about this book and this person. But before we get into that, we want to shout out and find out where you're from. We know we say hello to our Facebook Live audience and to Twitter and to YouTube and to everywhere that we are possibly online. LinkedIn, we say hello to everyone, even to our, I think we're on Google and all of the other places that we're on in terms of being able to hear us through podcasts, Spotify. So we're happy to be here, and we want you to listen and join in this conversation. Do us a big favor. Tell us where you're watching from. Make sure you like and you share so that we'll see. I see a long line of people already ready to tell me. And so we want to shout out Montisa Watkins from Detroit. Thank you for supporting us. To Dr. Chella Belcher, Connecticut, Pastor Siegfried Benton, Temple Hills, Maryland. Welcome. Good evening, Pastor Charles, Far Rockaway. Rebecca Brown, thank you for being here tonight. Arizona's here. Valerie Moore, Deacon Valerie Morse, thank you so much for being here tonight. By way of Queens and Georgia, Sharon Gill, Elder Sharon Gill, welcome from Maryland. Deacon Ryan, Cincinnati. Diane Christopherson from Adrian, Michigan. Again, we see you all and we ask that you will share this conversation so that we can make sure that everybody is going to have the benefit of listening to this wonderful conversation. Before we get into it and before we start introducing our guests, I want to make sure that we pay homage to Tina Turner. Many of you may not know, and many of you may know already that she transitioned and she is no longer here on this physical plane, but certainly with the ancestors. And what a joy it was to meet her and to see her in concert during my days at the Apollo Theater. And so we want to make sure that we say that. And then we want to just talk about some of the things that are happening before. So let me just bring, before we bring our guest, I want to bring Bishop Flunder up. I want to make sure we bring Bishop Flunder up. Bishop Flunder is the presiding prelate of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries. She's also the senior pastor of City of Refuge United Church of Christ, and she helps me to moderate and co-host this particular show, Beyond the Gatekeepers. And so we're excited to have her. And I just wanted to bring Bishop Flunder up because we got to talk about this Ron DeSantis person. Before we bring our guest up, we've got to say something about Ron DeSantis and what he is doing. Bishop Flunder, please greet our people.
Well, let me say hello to everyone. Good evening to everyone. Uh, it is my joy always to be in conversation with all of the brilliant minds that are a part of this incredible broadcast, this time that we have together, but also so many of you who are justice warriors and are living in this time that we are in and seeking to thrive. God bless all of you for being a part. I'm certainly not surprised. I don't think any of us would be um, at what it is that is happening. I just left Florida not long ago, and even the Floridians are shocked and appalled, a goodly portion of them. You need not
Yes,
think that all of Florida is in support of their governor. You
of
need not
course.
think that. And
Absolutely.
it is a peculiar time, but then again, it's not a peculiar
Mm-hmm.
time. I think that it is more than anything a desperate, desperate time for the folks who really do believe and think that they can turn the United States away from a democracy to a communist nation in some way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, Communist in the concept of being ruled by a totalitarian government
Mm-hmm. Dictator,
that has
sure.
every intention to be
Mm-hmm.
dictators. We don't. England just crowned a king
Yes, they did.
Okay, and even he is a monarch with without let's say the powers of
That's
his
right.
predecessors. He's a
Mm-hmm.
monarch in place because people love having a monarch and the pomp and circumstance. But they're a monarchy with a democratic method, a democratic
Mm-hmm.
way. We're not going to have a monarchy in this country. It's just not going to work. It
Right.
just not going to work. It's not going to work. And I think we're having the last vestiges of that intention, and the intention to force it upon us through a staged Supreme Court and the other ways in which it is showing up. So let them keep talking. Ron DeSantis has had the opportunity to expect is to bring himself into the limelight for this moment, and already the people with the money to make someone like him president are trying to decide where their money is going to go, and it likely will not go to him. What an
Mm-hmm.
interesting time that we are in. We'll talk more.
Indeed. Thank you so much for that, Bishop Flunder. I wanted to bring that up to the surface. Before we bring our guests, I want to just shout out Claudette Spence from Queens and Reverend Davina Korea Jones, Bridge Conference Minister for Northern California Nevada Conference, uh, Deacon Marlene McLaurin from Baltimore, Maryland. Welcome. Uh, Dr. David Alexander is here. Georgia is representing, and Bishop-Elect Sonia is here. Rim is representing from Atlanta, Georgia. Okay, we have a great conversation with a great woman who is here on Beyond the Gatekeepers, Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia Thompson, who is the Associate General Minister for Wider Church Ministries and co-executive for Global Ministries for the United Church of Christ. And she has authored a book called Drums in Our Veins. Drums in Our Veins. In advance, I'm going to tell you that we are going to give away some books tonight. We want to make sure that you put hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers. I'm going to keep saying that throughout the entire conversation, but certainly we want to welcome Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia Thompson, and we would love for her to greet our audience tonight.
It is a pleasure to be here on Beyond the Gatekeepers. Wonderful to see you, Bishop Flunder and Bishop-Elect Brown. Always a pleasure to be in spaces with you, and I'm looking forward to our conversation this evening.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you very, very much.
Yes.
And so you have this book, Drums in Our Veins, and I believe it was published in 2020. And so Bishop has a way of, we've been doing actually Beyond the Gatekeepers since May of 2020. So it's been 3 years. And Bishop Flunder has a way of calling these books that have come out in the pandemic as COVID writings. And so tell me, why did you write this book of poetry?
I think it wrote me. And I've been writing for a long time. My mother passed in 2018, God rest her soul. And I think after she passed, I had been writing for many years, and the opportunity to really stop and begin compiling some of the poems that I had amassed, because I had never thought about publishing my poetry. But you know, you're sometimes you're the people who know you, whether biologically or otherwise, have a way of speaking into your life. And my mother had always said, "So when are you going to publish that book?" And unfortunately, it took me, after she had passed, to really get around to compiling the poetry, but also getting it published. And so I self-published, because publishing poetry is very challenging. So I compiled it in 2018. It took a few years to get it published. The thing that I would say about drums is the title of drums. I want to talk a little bit about the title, if you don't mind. And the title of Drums in Our Veins came from a conversation that I had with my mother. And I was talking to her one day, and actually in 2017, about a year before she passed. And I was telling her that I have this love for Brazilian music, and that I really thought it was the drums, that, Brazilian music has very distinct Afro rhythms, and she said, well, she said when she was growing up, the old people would say that there are people who could hear the voices of the ancestors in the beat of the drums. Now, my mother was always a very conservative Christian, and so this was a little, jarring for me that she was talking this ancestor language. So I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "There are people who could hear the voices of the ancestors in the beat of the drum." She said, "And maybe you are one of those people." And so, this idea of drums in our veins came from that conversation. This idea that somehow we carry these drums and that we can hear the beat of the drums and the voices of the ancestors, guiding and present in meaningful ways. And so I borrowed from what she had said. And so that became the title of this particular body of poetry.
Wonderful. That is amazing. And I know you take the reader on a personal genealogical history, using your own, but you also take them through a journey of Africa. And I know that Bishop has had this experience as well, in terms of her genealogy, and been on a journey. And so I want to be in conversation around that as well. Tell us what that was like to take us on your journey into your life and your history and your ancestry.
Yeah, I think identity is very important, and particularly for people whose lives were disrupted by the colonial project and all its manifestations. Identity is not fully known. So we could talk about being Jamaican or African American or any of those, but there are places that we came from before we arrived in these shores. And for many of us, it's hard to figure out, what makes us tick, because I believe that the places where we come from and those places that inform our DNA shape us in deep and meaningful ways, spiritually, regardless of the traditions that ground us, right? And at some point, I'll unpack what I just said. So, so um, for me, it was important because I was born in Jamaica. My parents moved to this country when I was a teenager. I've lived in this country more than I lived on the island, and I've always felt that there was more to my self understanding, and I wanted to know where I came from. And Kingston, Jamaica was not enough for me. And so I went ahead and I did my DNA, and it came back in a particular way. And I talk about that a little bit in drums at the beginning, because that is a part of the journey for me, right? And there are certainly things and ways that I understand myself. I carry a lot of old people wisdom, and a lot of ways that I never understood, and I just thought that's what everybody did, and my mother raised me in a particular kind of way, that as I begin to unpack what it means to hold African tradition and African identity, it started to shape and inform me beyond the doors of the church. And that became important, to, for example, know that both of my grandfathers, paternal and maternal, were traditional healers, medicine people. You got a problem, they're gonna go to the woods, fix your poultice, slap something on in a leaf, and you're good. And those are things that we have lost along the way in terms of our traditions and our practices, and things that were told to our forebears that, That's just hoodoo, voodoo, moodoo, disparaging ways that those things were talked about. They're now being sold to us in potions and powders in the pharmacies, right? Ginger root, turmeric, all these things, you beat them into a powder and we're buying them, but what comes out of the soil we treat with great disdain. So it was important for me to recover heritage and culture and tradition and make meaning of my life out of those places. um, and to begin to name how the traditions have shaped me and how my mother raised me to honor the traditions in the context of a conservative Christianity. I don't know how she did it, but she did. And it took me years, of finding my way to progressive Christian space to understand what she had taught me from the spaces of her own conservative Christianity. And so this African piece, when I did my DNA, it came back predominantly Nigerian, which explained for me why Ifa was, kept knocking at my door, right? It didn't make any sense to me. We don't necessarily have some of the resonances in the Jamaican context that you see in places like Cuba, or, where Santeria, which is an Ifa derived tradition, is present, or Candomblé in Brazil. And so when my DNA came back and it was just this, plethora of, so high with the Nigerian, I was like, oh yeah, there it is. Right. So it came back 100% African, which was also pretty mysterious because I did the DNA for other people in my family and I was the only one that came back 100% African. So there's a mystery to that too, and a mystery to how, to what shapes us and forms us, because we come from the same people, but we somehow get shaped by different aspects of the same DNA, right? So when the DNA came back, my family was like, oh yeah, it makes total sense. That's why she's the way she is. Okay.
That's good. I like that. I'm going to let Bishop Flunder just chime right on in, especially around his DNA. I received two gifts a couple of years back, maybe like 3 or 4 years, for Ancestry.com and the 23andMe. And I didn't do it. And I waited. And so once I did it, I still didn't delve into it. And so it's really just the last 2 years that I've been delving into it. And I found out who my great grandparents are. I know their names,
Amen.
I went to Charleston and didn't understand, to be like, oh, I felt something in Charleston. I was like, my family's not from here. They're from South Carolina, but they're not from Charleston, South Carolina. And only to call a cousin, and she said, yeah, you're wrong. Your great grandfather came on the shores. Your great grandfather came on the shores of Charleston, off the slave ships. His name was Jesse T. Alfred. I was like, what?
Yeah.
So many things to know and to learn about our genealogy and what's in our DNA. And I am probably 93% Nigerian.
There you go.
Yeah. So,
Hey, sis.
right. Hey, sis. Hey, cousin.
That's right.
Bishop.
That's right.
Well, yes, 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 and amen to everything that I just heard, and the powerful realities of finding out who we are helps us to understand why we do what we do, the way we do it. And I understand this completely. I've been following my genealogy for quite some time, and found out a whole lot of things that made me understand certainly the Igbo part, and certainly the Native American part, because I also know uh, the tribes that my grandmother, in particularly, was a part of, and and probably there's more to that than what we can really find out, because we we're not certain about Native American tribes either. We just know that a lot of our people, when they were in the diaspora from the South, came through what we would call reservations or native land, and a lot of us have that blood when we come through there. And then there's the slaveholders. The slaveholders. My grandfather is was very much Irish
Mm.
and Scottish. But if you had seen my grandfather, he was a very, very fair-skinned black man with, as we used to say, he had pink feet. Because he had a lot of Irish and Scottish in him. All of those things are stories. All of them are stories about what happened to all of the people that are in our bloodlines. But there's one thing that really sticks really close to me when we have this conversation, because as you know, as both of you all know, I was raised in the Pentecostal church. And the African American Pentecostal church is probably more like indigenous African worship. More like, I have said it this way, that if you have a voodoo ceremony and a good Pentecostal service and you turn the volume down, you won't be able to know the difference. Because the way in which folks wear white on certain days, the way in which the dance happens, the way in which the circle dance, like in the movie Beloved, and the way in which people are would say in voodoo mounted by spirit, was the way Pentecostals, when I was coming along, and it still exists, when the presence of the Lord comes in. And Shirley and I talk about some of the ways in which our people reacted and when the presence of the Lord came in. And we have some folks that we both knew, but all kinds of things happen. And the important thing to say is that folks would be totally out of control, and giving way to the presence of spirit. I can say, as a person, an African American person, a person of African descent, that I am so enormously glad to have in my bloodline these miscellaneous realities that at one time or other fought and hated one another. Can I put it that way? Fought about land, fought about possession of body and mind, fought about religion and where the Spirit of God is moving. The reason I find myself having joy about that is because I am pretty much convinced that as generations continue on and on and on, that race is going to become a construct and not a reality, because there will be all kinds of intermarriage. It already exists. You probably heard me say before that a lot of our children don't think like we do, and consequently, don't think like we were taught to think. That you are this, you are white, you are black, you are Hispanic, or you are, and they're intermarrying with each other, and consequently, race is becoming a real melting pot. And the question that I have for us, as we are preparing ourselves for the dreams and visions of our young people, how can we seed into them the importance of two things: not forgetting where we came from, and in many ways the wickedness and the evil that is a part of our history, but also their being extremely determined not to see those things ever happen again. And I hope that they'll identify more with being justice oriented. Certainly I want them to be aware of their history and the stories, both good and bad, both good and evil, may I say it that way. But simultaneously, I want them to be so touched and trained by those realities and moved. These are the books that folks want to ban, by the way. Moved by those realities, that they will see to it that those things never happen again. That is my heart and where my prayers. So I hear you. I definitely hear you. And everybody that I know, hallelujah, that I was raised up around, clapped on the 2 and the 4. So I want to say to my Scottish and Irish part of myself, you're going to have to come along with the program, because dancing in the spirit and clapping on the 2 and the 4 is essential to the joy of my salvation. I just want to put that out there, let you have it.
Thank you for that, Bishop. This is a great read, and particularly for people who are uh, inspired to make social change, and that if they are passionate about social justice and equality, this is a great place to start. Even to those who are advocate and allies, this book, Drums in Our Veins. For those who are just joining us and you want to know what we're talking about, we are talking to the author, Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia Thompson, of Drums in Our Veins. This book can be purchased, because people are already asking in the chat, through Amazon. So we're going to put it in the chat. You'll see it. You can purchase the book on Amazon. You can purchase it digitally at Barnes and Nobles and other places. And so we are certainly glad to have Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia A. Thompson here with us. And if you want to win the book, you have to put hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers so that you can win this free book giveaway. This book is Drums in Our Veins. And this is a powerful book, transformative book, a book that's going to bring liberation to your life. And already we have questions from the audience. And so I am glad that you have 5 books by your side, Reverend Dr. Karen, because they are asking you to read. On page 174, they want to hear about inheritance. And I think that is wonderful.
Excellent. While she's looking, may I just also say,
Yes.
Bishop-Elect Vanessa, when we became a part of the United Church of Christ, my local church, City of Refuge, but also several of the churches that were and still are part of TFAM, we were sort of kind of lost in the wilderness about how we were going to connect to the UCC, and having some concerns and some questions. And you know how when you are trying to connect and you're in an atmosphere that that really was not your experience coming along as faith leaders, but was welcoming of women in ministry, welcome of same gender loving ministries, welcome for the work that we were doing in the inner city and such. I want to say about this sister, Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia A. Thompson. One of the things I want very much to say is that one of the first real, genuine, and authentic welcomes that we had coming into the United Church of Christ was from her directly. And it moved to the point at which we were able to establish a covenant between TFAM and the UCC. And that bridge enabled us to find ourselves in many, many different places throughout the United Church of Christ, in many of the councils, the associations, the conferences, the national work, the international work. And it's very important that I take this moment and say that not only is this sister, who, by the way, may well be the next general minister and president of the United Church of Christ, may I also say that we deeply appreciate your kindness and the work that it took, and that it is still taking for us to, in many ways, blend our experiences and our heritage without losing on either side of that conversation. I want to say it openly to everyone that she had so much to do with that. And I bless God for you, sister.
Thank you, Bishop. It has always been my pleasure to be present in making sure that the denomination understood the Black Pentecostal presence in the church. It was confusing for many, but here we are many years later, and I was reflecting on General Synod we were in Long Beach when that resolution came to General Synod, and I remember some of the conversations in the hearing. And, we're many years now, 10 years, it's been 10 years since we codified that covenant. And so we still have work to do. And I think there are commitments that we will talk about maybe a little bit somewhere down the road in terms of what might be next for the United Church of Christ and the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries as a part of who we are. So I'm going to turn my attention to inheritance. And one of the things about, as you read drums in our veins, you will find that every poem is date and time stamped with a location, right? And it's important for me because I travel so much that I don't remember what was the motivation or where was I when I wrote this thing. And so this thing developed organically over the years because I wanted to remember where I was when I wrote something. And so every poem has this at the end of it. Inheritance. Ours is no solitary journey. We are invited to travel, accompanied by generations calling us into our deeper selves, whispering to us of our wisdom and strength. We are travelers, ours a journey back to the self. We dispel the projected myths, excavating truth. We return to knowing while we came, receiving validated memories, others labeled as misguided fantasies. We dream of tomorrow, of clarified, embedded understandings. We plan yesterday, holding to unrevealed mysteries. Walking beyond time, we traverse today boldly. Inheritors of keys to unspoken visions, we live defying history, rewriting our stories. We are intentional in moving, water making streams, dirt making mountains. We are more than we appear to be. We find our way to redefining greatness. We awaken from imposed inferiority, escaping the bindings of mental enslavement. We hear before we understand. We see before we know, guided by our surrender. We navigate to greater than we are. We ease anew into the flow, willing that we live whole. We emancipate the aspirations of generations. Yesterday, today, tomorrow, walking together, hearing the same drums beating in our veins. I think so much of who we are, particularly as African descendant people, but I don't think it's just African descendant people. So much of who we are has become conflated in this enterprise around the enslavement of people, right? And it's not just the physical enslavement, because we've been emancipated. Well, so they tell us, right? Except that the ways in which our identity has been co-opted, right? The fact that we don't know who we are and where we come from, it means that we have to be intentional in going back. The Yoruba people say that we come knowing. And that as we and if you watch little kids, right, they walk in this way that you're sometimes mystified about the things that they say, and why they say the things that they say. And they have this I think about my granddaughter who's 6, who has this such a strong sense of self, but then we go into these institutions that attempt to reshape and reframe, right? But if we remember that we come knowing, a part of the journey is remembering why we came. And we came with brilliance, and we came with boldness, and we came with strength, and we came with purpose, right? And that gets reshaped in the institutional facades that we encounter, right? And all of a sudden we're questioning ourselves, and the certainty isn't there anymore. And I think inheritance is a lot about that journey, the journey back to the self, the journey back to knowing, the journey that we have to take by ourselves, right? And it's something that cannot be externally validated for you. You have to know for yourself that the path that you're journeying, right, is guided by spirit, accompanied by the ancestors, right? And most of us come into that knowing and then attempt to place it into frameworks, right, that have been handed to us. It creates dissonance for us, and for some, even psychosis, trying to fit um, this sense of knowing of spirit into this little thing that somebody told us that this is what we're supposed to know or supposed to be. And so I think in inheritance, and I write a lot about this because a part of my journey is actually here in Drums in Our Veins. My journey back to my own sense of knowing and of the ancestors. My mother, and I talk a lot about my mother because I would say my mother was my first teacher, right? In these unintentional ways, right? Um, I believe that people have a way of passing on wisdom if we're willing to hear it. And so a lot of my mother for me was framed in this conservative Christian context until I started to listen to her differently. And some of that came as she was um, walking through dementia. Because what happened as she was going through dementia was she was regressing back to what she knew in a different time from when she was younger. So, I was talking to her one day, and you know she told me, she said, we it's part of a longer conversation, but I was telling her, about my encounters with the ancestors and with the traditions, and how that was creating a lot of challenge for me because our Christianity doesn't always make room for who we are and for what is emerging by spirit, right? And so I told her, I said, I'm just a little challenged. And she said, well, follow the ancestors. They know what they're doing. And it was just a profound thing to me because I'm thinking to myself, where is that coming from? But my mother was a woman who was raised in the context of African traditions. And to your point, Bishop, she was 85 years old when I learned that in her youth, the places where she went, where she grew up going to what we call Kumina services. And Kumina is an African tradition, particularly in the Jamaican context, African derived. Um, but she also went to the Pentecostal church, right? And she talked about, how, they would go to the Kumina services and people would fall out on the floor. And, depending on how somebody fell out, it meant something, and she talked about her fascination with the traditions. But when they would go to church, they were taught that the traditions were wrong and that if they went to the Kumina services, they would go to hell. And so, even in terms of the healing traditions and the things that they knew, they walked away from it because they were taught about this retributive, God who punished people for walking in places and spaces that were not of their own making, but were of spirits making. So inheritance is a lot about that, about finding finding our, because I think that there's a collective here. It's individual, but it's also collective, about finding our way to who we are, and to how spirit is being revealed to us.
That's so good. I was just reading something today, and the first thing that the person said in the book was, Spirit, reveal yourself to us. And
Mm,
so we're always looking for Spirit to reveal itself to us. And Bishop-Elect Sonia says her 5-time removed great grandfather was Governor John Milton of Florida. In his final message to the state legislature as the Civil War was ending, he declared that death would be preferable than freeing slaves. He then killed himself. She says, I am
wow.
his Gentile, yet his DNA is married to my Nigerian DNA in my veins. Yeah, yeah. We have another question for you, Dr. Karen Georgia Thompson. And so I can tell where this is going. So
Hmm.
I'm going to say to the people now, if you have a question, make sure that you write the word question so that we can know that it is a question, and we will ask that as time permits. But this is connected to something that you said previously. How can we learn to interpret the messages that ancestors may seek to transmit through the drums?
Well, let's start by unlearning what we think we know. Um, you know, Quite often I think we're looking for definitives, right? And we want things to fit a certain kind of way. And I think the first thing is, if we say that we are people who are guided by spirit, then we must make room for the mystery that is the spirit, right? Um, so I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, whatever the traditions are that we find ourselves in, I believe that spiritual discipline is important. And when I talk about spiritual discipline, that may be our prayer life, our meditation life. For many years now, I wake up in the mornings and I free write, and it's a way for me to hear spirit first thing, right? I pray, I meditate. These are ways and places that I deepen my spiritual life and my connection to spirit, right? Um, but spirit shows up in these wonderfully magnificent ways, right? Um, that are not the doors of the church or the religious institutions that are familiar to us, right? So I think a part of even let me frame this in some Christian language too, right? That even if you talk about your Christianity, or whether it's Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, anything, right? Um, you you need some kind of discipline, right? Some kind of spiritual discipline beyond what you're going to get from walking into that house of worship and sitting for an hour. What we do from Monday to Saturday matters,
Mhm.
right? And our spaces of worship are really trying to help us to find our way, or at least that's what we should be doing, right? Is helping people to find their way to deeper meaning and understanding in their lives. So I would say, um, find your way to the stillness. In the Psalm 46, verse 10, it says, "Be still and know." And that stillness is important. We are busy and we want God to find us in the busyness. If you start off 10 minutes a day, I challenge the folk, start off. If you can't make 10, start with 5 and make your way, find your way to sitting in the stillness to hear. Prayer is a way of speaking to God, or the ancestors, or whatever your tradition is, right? That is you talking. It's like a one-way conversation, talking, 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 talking. At what point do you stop to hear the other person? If you were in a conversation with somebody and they dominated the conversation, you wouldn't go back. But we go before God, we sit before spirit, blah, 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 blah. God, I want this, I need that. Woe is me. Just just stop and find your way to the stillness. Be still and know that I am God.
May I ask something? There's something that comes up for me, particularly because it's not my ears that hear you, it's my heart. My heart and spirit understand precisely what it is that you're saying and where you are. But it brings up for me a question, because I can remember our early years in becoming a part of the United Church of Christ. And where we were different was our Methodist experiences. It was that African American Christian church experience. And there were some ways that had to do with polity, some of it had to do with praxis, some of it had to do with practice, uh, some of it had to do with theology, ideas and concepts. You know, I remember the conversation about the communion table, and that so many of our people came from the Methodist traditions, and we were going to sing the blood that Jesus shed for me during communion, you know, and had a lot of our folks pushed back against the idea of what they called a sanitized communion, um, for to remember essentially the true painful death of Jesus, and the bloodshed during that time felt as though it was that we were trying to sanitize that moment in some situations. So it was that kind of thing. I think I that was years ago. I mean, that was a goodly long time ago. Tons of theological education among us, uh, tons of conversation among us. I'm not going to say that the majority of the people that were part of the denomination would still be able to embrace everything that Pentecostal, Baptist, Black Methodist experience had been like. But I would say, I would, the question I think that comes up for me, given your incredible, authentic embrace of Afrocentric or African influenced faith, how do you think that will enhance perhaps both the life of the United Church of Christ, but also how would it enhance the streams that are coming into the United Church of Christ, or desire to come into the United Church of Christ? Our fellowship has grown exponentially in the last few years, but not everyone is interested, if you understand, being beyond our fellowship to choosing denominations, if that makes sense. How would you say that these things can work together? What would be the journey that we should embrace that will cause realities like what it is that we're talking about to be affirmed and encouraged, and not in on either side of the conversation diminished? Is that too
I got you.
All right. All right.
I'm feeling you.
Talk to us, sister.
Um, Let me start by saying Christianity is not an identity. And we see that playing out significantly around things like Christian nationalism, um, because people have taken on Christianity as identity and are holding it in a particular way. I would say that a big part of of what happens in TFAM, and I want to say this with the fellowship, right? Um, People who are a part of the fellowship have been pushed in a particular way around their identity, particularly as it pertains to um, social constructs around human sexuality, right? So the identity question becomes foremost, right? And for many, they have been rejected by the institutions and have had to seek for themselves alternative spaces to how they understand God, right? So they're not, and I don't want to impose a particular thing, but I want you to hear what I'm saying, right? Which is people have worked on their identity. They have come out of closets. They have taken risk in order to be authentic, right? And authenticity is important. And I think that particularly for those of us who are heteronormative in our pursuits, we don't have to struggle around identity, right? So identity never becomes a question. For people who are minoritized, or even for women, for indigenous people, in the face of majority constructs, you have to wrestle with your identity. And you cannot know God if you don't know yourself, right? I mean, we talk about that all the time in these ethereal kinds of ways. But what Spirit invites us into is knowing, so that we can know God, not because somebody else told us, right? But because we've connected and we understand God for ourselves, right? And I believe that we've done um, multiple disservices to people over the years by framing for them what um, uh, I would say majority context have said they should be as people, right? So, as a Black woman, there was a time when, we were told we were not going to get jobs if we didn't perm our hair or straighten it or look a certain kind of way, right? And then we all started realizing that it was a bunch of crap, doo doo, right? And we said, no, this is who I am, right? This is, and we began to find for ourselves what it meant to be who we are. Indigenous people started wearing their beads, and somebody had put in the chat about about African beading, right? That we started to look for our authentic selves. And so, Bishop, I think your question leads me into this place of talking about how we make space for people to show up exactly as they are. And
Yes,
that,
just this little piece. Definitely, yes.
yes,
And around all of the issues that you lifted up, around people who are same gender loving, or people who are trans or gender nonconforming, but also people who have emerged from Black experiences of church. Again, Pentecostals, Baptists, Methodists, particularly with the Southern influence of a
yes,
lot of our,
ma'am.
which is as much at times as a struggle as the affirmation
Mm-hmm.
of same gender loving people,
Yes.
or coming forward as women in positions of power. And so, yes, I think that all of it is true. All of it is true. it's just a big piece to chew off.
Mm-hmm.
When all of those things also define the people that we are reaching out to as a rich welcome. So I
Yes.
want to, I didn't want to cut you off. I just wanted to say that yes, the issue of being same gender loving and gender nonconforming is a part of it, but
Yes.
also
Apart.
it is the emergence because
Yes.
there are already were same gender loving people in the denomination
Mm-hmm.
in a significant number, but very few who are black.
Mm-hmm.
So it
Yeah.
made a totally, if you understand what I'm saying, another kind of. So I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to say that I'm not sure whether or not the denominational piece
You
was as
know,
much in some ways of, you know what I mean. So, and what is
that
the vision? What are you hearing in terms of?
the denominational shift, right? You know, for I would say the past 7, 8 years or so, some of my research has been focused on religious multiplicity, right? And the ways in which individuals are identifying across more than one religious tradition. And religious multiplicity shows up in many ways, right? Because it is multiplicity, right? um, and that has nothing to do with race, right? Except that when people self-identify as Christian Buddhist, it's like, oh my gosh, that's great. Christian Jews, oh, that's fantastic. Christian Muslims, oh, what a joy. And that's also manifesting itself in inter religious and interspiritual marriages are on the increase in this country and globally, right? But you want to talk about a problem. The problem is not about being Methodist, right? You tell somebody that you're Christian and practicing some African tradition, oh, that is not possible, right? That's demonic, but it's a part of who we are, that the indigenous people are. And I was talking to a leader in this denomination, who identified for me that indigenous young people are leaving the church because the church is not helping them to make meaning of their spirituality, right? And years ago, I was talking with a mentor, older African woman, who said to me, she said, the ancestors are not going to allow the traditions to die. They're going to keep calling us back to the traditions. And so many of us are being called back to healing traditions, and we're in the church. We're not leaving the church. What we're saying is that it is important for us to understanding the grounding of our identity around our inheritance and the things that we got from our forebears, right? That DNA. There are things that shape and form us and inform us, right? And that it becomes important for us to go back and seek, because we were taught that they were wrong. And as we've gone back and sought, it has actually informed and enriched this thing that we understand as Christianity, right? And that it's actually the deepening of our identity in the context of our roots that for many of us have held us to the institutions that have brutalized us and traumatized us as women and people of color, right? So in going back and finding those spaces, right, let me also name that I have colleagues who are white, who are going back and they're finding out that their ancestors came from Europe, and they've started practicing and weaving in Celtic traditions because that's a part of their identity, right? Um, and so many other traditions that came off the continent, right? For I'm talking about the European. Let me rephrase that: Eurasia, that people have gone back, and they're finding, Greeks are going back and owning what people called mythology. It wasn't mythology, it was a way that Greeks understood spirituality, right? We read it as myth, but if you go back and read Greek mythology from a spiritual point, it certainly aligns with places like Ifa, where God is understood in multiplicity. So people are going back and they're finding their truth. Some are choosing to leave the church because the church has become closed to hearing, right? Others of us have said, well, we're here and the church needs to hear. And the church needs to begin to hold for itself the reality that when we say that ecumenism is and that Christianity is about unity and not uniformity, right? That the lack of uniformity, right, means that we get to show up as who we are. We get to understand and name God for ourselves. Where we choose to practice in community is a whole other thing, right? So what informs you? I would name, and I've been very public about my journey, about where I am. They still kind of offered me this job, so I have publicly named my own journey with the traditions, and I've been asked, how does that inform me? I'm a Christian minister who is grounded in the traditions in a way that allows me to pay reverence to my ancestors, to understand that in much the same way folks talk about the saints, that there are those who understand that the ancestors who've gone before are saints, right? And when we talk about standing on the shoulders of, right, it's not some kind of metaphorical thing. If we really want to understand that, we are literally standing on the shoulders, the spirits that we're being carried by the spirits of our ancestors, right? In these deep and meaningful ways that are allowing us, one, to survive through trauma, two, to live into purpose, and three, to do things that we never imagined that we could do, right? I don't believe that that is the work of a singular Christian God. I believe that God is more than we can understand, right? That it's really a fault of human hubris to think that we could know God. I mean, that is ignorant. We will never know, because the paradox is that the more we know, the more we need to know, right? So I think for me, Bishop, your question is one that we need to continue to wrestle with, which is, how do we live into the emerging ways in which people are connecting to their identities, because identity is not singular. So I may examine myself as a woman, right, and say, as a woman, this is what's emerging for me. And that may then multiply when we talk about being a Black woman. And when I talk about being a Black woman from Jamaica, right, a Black woman from Jamaica whose grandfathers were traditional healers and whose grandmother was a herbalist, right? What does that mean? And I'm still in the church because I also am an ordained Christian minister who understands myself to be called by God vocationally to serve the church, right? And so the emergence of these other things has not said, Karen Georgia Thompson, you need to leave the church. What it has said is, Karen Georgia Thompson, you need to stay because this is a part of your purpose. This is a part of why you came, right? And so I believe that in this moment, a part of the work of the church is to open wider the doors and to spread wider the table. And the thing that I often talk about when I talk about that is I have this dining table, one of those old school dining table with the leaves, and this one has two leaves in it, right? That's where I'm sitting at the dining table. And if I take out the two leaves, it seats 6 people. If I put in an extra leaf, it fits 8 people. And if I put in that other leaf, it fits 10 people. So my challenge to the church is, how do we keep expanding the table? um, what is it going to take for us to actually be the hospitable space that we aspirationally desire to be, when we don't want to hear how people identify themselves? If I tell you this is who I am, you don't get to reconstruct my identity to suit the paradigms that you have found for yourself. You just don't get to do that, right? I tell people my name is Karen Georgia. Oh, Karen, that's such a lovely name. No, Karen Georgia, both names. Oh, really? Wow, Karen, that's so wonderful. No, Karen Georgia. My name and my naming of myself is a part of my identity. So at the part where you start renaming me because your tongue can do Mary Catherine and Peggy Sue and Betty Sue, but it can't do Karen Georgia, that's a personal problem for you. And you need to go fix that for yourself. And there are other ways in which we deconstruct and reconstruct people and we don't hear them. So can we really be a space and a place where we make room for people to show up as they are? We hear them when they name themselves. We hear them when they identify themselves, right? And we are fine in saying, you are welcome. And we go to the basement and we get that extra leaf and we fit it in the table and we make room.
That's it, and that's all. So listen, I'm telling you now, because this is rich. It's so rich. And I want to say to those who are watching, you have been listening to Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia A. Thompson. Yeah. And she is the author of the book Drums in Our Veins. And I just have to say that if you want to purchase the book, which we would love for you to do, you will get this book on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. Dr. Karen Georgia, they're asking, is this book inaudible?
And I saw that question and I honestly don't know the answer to that question. I'll go look.
Okay. Very good.
And find that out. But
Excellent.
I don't know, to be
So
honest.
if people want to get this book, this is how you do it. Please make sure. But I would love for everybody to just share this conversation. Share this conversation even after today. People go back to Spotify and listen to it if you don't want to see it. Just share this conversation. It's so rich. Multiple identities. I hear people saying, listen to the ancestors if you can. Find your way to listen to the ancestors. But there's some other things you said. We get to understand and name God for ourselves. That's rich. You know, so many things that you have said. Christianity is not an identity, and I just want people to be able to go back. It's a book of poetry, but it is life-giving. And we want to make sure that you put hashtag beyond the gatekeepers. Make sure that you spell it right, else you're not gonna win. because I can see already that some folks ain't spelled it right. Make sure you put hashtag beyond the gatekeepers with an S, okay, at the end. I see you, Dr. Martha Simmons. Open the church to multiple identities. Christianity is not an identity. Yes, ma'am.
Hallelujah.
That's correct. We are excited about that. I'm not going to ask for any more questions. We are growing close to the hour, but Bishop Flunder, do you have something that you want to say? And then I'm going to ask for a final remark about your book, Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia A. Thompson.
I just feel like it was the word of God for the people of God. It is the shift. It will take us, I think, it will be this kind of conversation that will move Christianity and accompanying faith paths from being separate from one another. I believe that the answer is that we are in Reformation, but it's not just Reformation for Christianity. It is Reformation for religion and spirituality in so many different ways. There is a coming together. It's not a melting pot, it's a quilt. And that's what I believe that Spirit is calling for. God is greater than all of these different things that we have assigned to God. And we heard a prophetic word today about the move of God for where we are going, what is next for us. Thank you so very much, Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia A. Thompson. God bless you.
Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia, will you please give us a final word as it relates to your book and something that you want our listeners and our audience to be able to hear?
Yeah, drums in our veins. I believe is a place that will allow you to connect with ways in which spirit is guiding you, right? Um, there's poetry, the written word is very much spiritual, right? And there is theology here if we're willing to hear it for ourselves. Um, if it's okay, I would like to close with a poem that's actually not in the book. And it's in my next book of poetry, which is the title that I'm working with is Painting Rainbows with Teardrops. Okay. So that's the follow up to Drums in Our Veins. But I hope that people find their way to discovering their identity for themselves, to experimenting with what it means to name themselves. Who are you at the core? So I wrote this poem actually in 2020, and it's called Lessons, and it's actually one of my favorite poems. It says, "We come into this world ready. We come knowing, we come with purpose. We are ready. Knowing is of the self, knowledge of our power, awareness of the wisdom traveling with us, instinct aligning our journey. Purpose is present, the peace that we are. We are courageous, we are open, we are a part of the universe. We encounter a world unaccepting, our opinions great, our certainty wavers. We lose purpose. We hide our gifts. The pain of living like water flowing, changing rock wears us down, tearing us at the core. We are ready. Our aches and pains, a sign of restlessness, calling us back to brilliance. The weariness in our spirit, a reminder, purpose awaits, pulling at our center, willing us to remember we came into this world ready. We are enough. We are brilliant. We are ready. And I want to say that we are ready for whatever is emerging among us. And I just want to thank you for the invitation to be present.
Ashe, amen, and so it is. Everything is in divine timing. I remember when I reached out and everything is in divine timing. That's what I want to say. this is the right time for you to be on this show saying all that you said on tonight. And I know that people have been blessed by it. I know that people will share this conversation in days, weeks, and months to come. Months to come. And so we say amen, ashe, and so it is. Thank you to all of our listeners for being a part of Beyond the Gatekeepers tonight. Remember that we're going to give away 2 books. Before we do that, we're going to go to some advertisement, and Bishop Flunder is going to read the first 2 that come.
God bless each of you who are with us tonight. I know that you have been blessed. I know that you have been helped. I know that you have been given assurance in your faith and your walk with the divine. I'm going to ask you tonight, if you have been blessed, if you have been touched, support the broadcast by sending a donation via Cash App to $ TFAM Annual, TFAMANNUAL, or to PayPal at www.paypal.me/TFAM Justice. Help us to continue and to expand this opportunity to be folks who are shaping religion and faith in the time that we are in today. God bless you. And I certainly want to give you this wonderful opportunity to share with us in the TFAM Holy Convocation in 2023. I'm so happy to be able to say that our own Reverend Karen Georgia Thompson will be one of our preachers and teachers during this time of miracles, signs, and wonders in Atlanta, Georgia, July 5 through 9, July the 5th through the 9th. Registration is here. The accommodations are here. On this particular slide, you can see it. You can take a picture of it. You can go to the app on your Apple or other phones. I'm encouraging you. If you hadn't planned to come, go to www.radicallyinclusive.org. Visit. Get your registration in. Get it while the rooms for the main hotel are still available. And let's spend some time talking about and sharing about where we are as people of faith and where Spirit is taking us into our what's next. Experience miracles, signs, and wonders. God bless each of you. We got a yes from Bishop Barber just a couple of weeks ago, and he will be there also teaching and talking about public policy. You can't miss this one. Join us. Miracles, signs, and wonders. God bless.
Thank you so much. Before we do this, I want to just make sure I shout out those who stayed with us tonight. Judith Craighead, Pastor Kim Kendrick, Daly James, thank you for being here. Pastor Lawrence Tanner Richardson, thank you for being here with us tonight. Taryn Webb, we appreciate you so very, very, very much. Millie Langley, thank you for being on. Ebony Only, thank you. Reverend Tanya Jackson, thank you. Bishop Diana Williams, thank you. Reverend Dr. Stacy May, thank you. Dr. Martha Simmons, thank you so much. LaJuan Washington, thank you for being here tonight. Elder Sharon Gill, all of you who have joined in and are still yet joining in. Again, this is Beyond the Gatekeepers. We were having a conversation with Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia A. Thompson, the author of Drums in Our Veins. And so right now we are at the portion of this show where we're going to give away 2 books. But if you want to purchase the book, you can go to Amazon.com and find that book there. So if you put the hashtag in Beyond the Gatekeepers, just like you see it on the screen, then you have the opportunity to win. And so we're going to ask Pastor Sue, who is in the background and is one of our associate producers, to help us to find out who the 2 winners are going to be for tonight. All right, we have one of the winners is Chella Belcher. One of the winners is Chella Belcher. And so, Chella, we ask that you go to the Beyond the Gatekeepers page and to our messenger. Make sure that you put your full name and address. Thank you so much, and congratulations to you. Our second winner. Our second winner is Marlene McLaurin. And so we say congratulations to you, Marlene. We ask that you go to the Beyond the Gatekeepers page and make sure that you put your full name and your address there. And we say congratulations to you one more time. And thank you to all of you that have been on with us on tonight. We certainly enjoyed Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia A. Thompson. We enjoyed Bishop Flunder and all of you who are supporting us on every platform. Okay, hold on. We got one more time to go. Bishop-Elect Sonia Williams says she's going to purchase a book and raffle it off. All right, so let's see who's going to win that. Come on. Let's see who's going to win. We've got one more person. I love it. I like it. Amen. Somebody say amen. Don't leave yet, y'all. Don't leave. Somebody's going to win again. Let's go. Colette Walker. Reverend Colette Walker, you are the winner. Make sure you do what I've asked. Put your name and address inside our inbox, and we're going to make sure that you get your book. Thank you so much. We love you tonight. Have a great evening, and by the grace of God, we'll see you next week.